You know what? Let's start this off by showing you my favorite way to ruin a knife by sharpening. Got this lovely beast here. Made this a few years ago. See if we can make it better. Or worse. Alright, welcome to the garage. This here is one of my favorite tools. 2x72 5 horsepower belt sander. Now normally, you try and use a machine like this to make knives. Today, let's go and use it to ruin a knife. I think that's going to do the trick. And we're back. So, might be my favorite way of sharpening knives, but not the best way. Main thing is, it does work. Mostly. But the problem is, you do that more than once, you're going to end up taking away a lot of the knife. When you're sharpening a knife, you want to take away some material, but you don't want to take away the entire knife. And using anything that plugs into a wall, you're going to run into that problem. At our bakery, we have a lot of knives. They get used a lot. They get dull a lot. So we got to sharpen them a lot. This is what we end up using most often. This guy here will destroy a knife. Depending on the knife and how you use it, it can last a while still. So this particular knife has been at our shop for about 13 years. And if you look at it, not looking too bad. If you're trying to chop some stuff and it's a little too dull, take this bad boy. And you're off to the races. Is it sharp? Yeah, not particularly. Is it going to cut stuff? Yes, it will. Is it going to take away too much material eventually? Well, like I said, it depends. You only take a few swipes at it. This particular blade, 13 years old, still working pretty good. On the other hand, this knife here also comes from the bakery, but it's used more often by the cooks. And they tend to chop stuff a lot more aggressively. Consequently, they end up sharpening it a lot more often. Same idea. Take this bad boy, give her a few swipes. Now you got a usable knife. Take too many swipes. Problem you might not see right away till you get down here to the end and you see that nice little S curve. Take this guy, go to chop some stuff, and not flat on the board. That's going to be a problem. These guys here tend to be a little bit too aggressive. Take away too much material, you end up with something that looks like that. This can be fixed. Matter of fact, it's going to take another trip to the garage. All right, we are back. A little bit of belt sander time. Flattened profile of that blade. So now, we've got something that will actually cut. Hopefully, none of you ever have to do this part. Next step is to actually turn this back into a knife. I think we're done with this thing. So turn this back into a knife. We're going to use a sharpener that I actually built. It's not something I invented. It's based on the Apex sharpening system. You can go check it out on Amazon. It costs about $350 and works awesome. What I bought instead was a cheap $35 Chinese knockoff. Thing worked pretty well for quite a while, but it did work well enough that I decided to take some of the parts, combine it with a few other pieces of junk in my garage, and I made my own. The idea is you want to try and maintain a nice consistent bevel on your knife blade. And for a kitchen knife, I'm talking about 16 degrees in terms of angle on the bevel itself. This chunk of wood here is about a 16-degree angle. Got a clamp here. Gonna insert the knife in the clamp. Then we've got this little rod mounted up here and more or less have 16 degrees. Now, the sharpening system that I originally got came with water stones, which again, worked great, but eventually they did wear out. So I replaced those with this set of diamond stones. 240, 400, 600, and 1000 grit, which is plenty to get yourself from a really ugly, busted up knife to a very nice cutting edge. So let's go ahead and set this guy up. Give me a minute. I think we are all set to go here. Got ourselves 240 grit diamond stone, and now we go into time-lapse mode. Something else that should be totally obvious is that you're obviously not meant to build your own version of this. Just get on Amazon, buy the Chinese one, 35 bucks, gonna come with a bunch of stones, gonna make life so much easier for you. That said, you don't have to buy the Apex version. There's, I don't know, probably dozens of different knife sharpeners out there. And the essential idea is that they hold a nice fixed angle and they allow you to do this as long as it takes. And we're done. With that side, flip it over, do it again. That should do it for the first pass with the 240 grit. Now that 240 is something you're only going to use when you're trying to rescue a knife the way we have been here. Ordinarily, you'd usually start with a 400 or maybe even the 600. That's the 400 done. Done with the 6. Final step for the diamonds, 1000 grit. Basically, all we're doing at this point is polishing off the scratches left. One more side with 1000 grit. All right, we should have ourselves a pretty beautifully polished edge, but we're not done yet. Now, these diamond stones do a great job removing material, and they do a pretty good job when it comes down to getting us close to that final edge. There we go. But we can do better. What we've got here are a set of water stones. The red ones do similar to what the diamond stones did, roughing in that bevel. So we've got a 180, 400, and an 800. I'm not going to be needing those since the diamond stones did that job for us. And then these guys, which some people call them Arkansas stones, because I think the good ones actually come from Arkansas, but these ones came from Amazon, which means that they pretty much came from China. So maybe we'll call them Shenzhen stones. We'll take the 1500. We're not going to go through all the stages here because we're not trying to create artwork, but I do want to show you the final stage using a water stone, create a little bit more of a polished edge. Same angle, same idea, but this time, actual stones instead of the diamonds. Now, these stones are great for putting a finished edge on the knife, but I do not like to use them to remove much material from the knife because the stones themselves will wear out very quickly. I think that'll work for sharp. We're not done yet. One final step. Get this puppy out of the way. All that sharpening has left us with a blade. It's got a beautiful beveled edge on it, but what happens with that sharpening is it creates what's called a burr. So all that metal that's being ground off and sticks to the very, very edge of the blade that you have to try and knock off. The way we do that is by stropping. On this strop, I've got 2 strips of leather. I've got green and red here. Basically, the green polishing compound is going to be a little bit rougher than the red. I'm going to rub some of this onto the leather here. Just take our knife edge and just run it down the length of the strop. And for this portion, all we're trying to do is just polish off that little burr that has formed on the edge of our bevel. Find our poor used piece of paper here and see how we did. Lovely. Now we have a finished sharp knife. That works great for most knives, but I do have one final sharpening method that is actually my favorite. It's the one I use most often. Before jumping into my final and favorite polishing method, let's talk about these stones just a little bit more. We've got diamond stones and we've got water stones. I really like these diamond stones, mainly because they last forever and they stay flat. The water stones, on the other hand, they do tend to abrade down, and eventually you're gonna dish them out a little bit. So you get this nice little curvature on the stone, which is not the end of the world because you can take another stone, polish that sucker flat, you're good to go again. But the other issue with the water stones is you have to use water, and the issue with the water is it's a mess. If you had to pick one, I would tend to pick the diamond stones. They're gonna last you forever. You're gonna be able to get a perfectly good edge with them. Life's gonna be good. That's what brings us to my final and favorite method, and that's this puppy. Just a big old piece of stone. Two-sided. Pretty much find these at any kind of kitchenware store. This particular one, I believe it's 1,000 grit on this side, 2,000 grit on this side. They usually come with a nice cheap little pedestal to mount it on. You use a piece of drawer liner to keep the stone from slipping, because when the stone's slipping, God, that's a pain in the ass. I'm also gonna be using my absolute favorite knife, and that's this guy here. An 8-inch chef's knife that I bought when I was in Korea way back in 1988. I've had this knife in continuous use since then. Still plenty of metal left on this thing, and I do want to try and keep it that way. So that's why I like to use just a traditional water stone for sharpening. This method involves a lot more technique than using the jig. In order to maintain that edge, I just rest my thumb behind the knife, try to find the edge there, and then we just draw that knife nice and smooth across the stone. Do the same thing on the other side. I keep this knife pretty sharp, so it's not gonna take a ton of swipes on this to get it back to a nice sharp knife. If you wanna go a little bit further, flip your stone over, a few more strokes. So this stone is something I use when I'm just trying to bring the edge back to life after having used the knife for a little bit. And that's pretty much it. Now, it is a water stone, and something obvious I should have mentioned is, in order to use it, you gotta have that thing soaked in water. And I try to get the stone in some water, I don't know, at least 5 or 10 minutes before I start sharpening. That way it's got some time to soak up the water. The final step, a couple of quick strokes with the strap. Have a nice clean edge to cut with. And that's something I'll do just before I'm gonna use the knife, because it takes a few seconds to get it set up, a few more seconds to take a few swipes on the stone, and you are good to go.